Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. The Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine is fast approaching its third anniversary. The price in human life paid by Ukraine continues to be devastatingly high. President Zelensky and his government have been unceasing in their efforts to find a just solution, something that the world hoped would be addressed at the just-ended Munich Security Conference. After attending the conference, President Zelensky embarked on a Middle East tour, visiting the UAE, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. With US-Russia talks looming in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, what are Ukraine's expectations and priorities? Well, to answer that question, we're joined by Iuliia Osmolovska, Director of GLOBSEC Kyiv. Iuliia, hello.
Hello.
And welcome back to TVP World. Good of you to take the time.
Thank you for inviting.
Pleasure as always. Okay, so I'd love to hear your main takeaways from the Munich Security Conference first, please.
Well, definitely we saw a sort of frustration from the position of European leaders to what they heard from American representatives. And actually, it's not about the essence of they told as such, but the tone with which it had been said. And this is something that we hear as impressions of those who had been attending the Munich Security Conference, especially from Ukrainian delegation. But in general, it had been expected in a way that Americans will be sending the messages they did send. And what for me more important is actually what comes after this Munich security exchange of statements, and particularly I'm implying the Paris summit, the extraordinary summit that had been called by the President Macron, and a number of European leaders were invited for that. So this actually, to me, an indication of at least an attempt to find a solution of how Europeans should act in this moment, and whether there is a possibility of actually to them come up with a coherent voice and a clear vision on how European security should look like and what is the role of the European countries in that, and Ukraine in particular.
Yes, although some EU countries, of course, are complaining that they haven't been invited. The number of countries invited is relatively small. Why do you think that was, and what, in concrete terms, would you like to see happen from the Ukrainian perspective?
Yes, definitely. I have a couple of explanations why a particular selection of countries had been invited for this extraordinary summit. First, I see it as a sort of a follow-up to the Weimar Plus statement on the level of ministers of foreign affairs from 12th of February, where the leaders, together with Ukrainian foreign minister, come with a joint statement and emphasize the necessity for Europeans to have their voice in the future peace talks, and that security on the European continent is the joint responsibility of US, European capitals, and Ukraine, and this should be taken into consideration. Second, so the selection of countries that participated in this Weimar Plus meeting actually mostly the same as we see had been invited for this Paris summit talks. But also there is an information from Reuters with the document that the questionnaire that allegedly had been sent from American side to Europeans with concrete questions, what real contributions European capitals could make in order to improve Ukraine's position of strength in negotiations and the economic leverage, namely what extra sanctions they are ready to provide to put the economic pressure on Russia, and also where they need concrete support and what kind of support they would need from America. So I think that This is something that requires a coordinated response from the Europe to this American questionnaire, and probably the selection of these countries had been made in the understanding of real contributors and real countries that could provide with these concrete answers about their contributions to European security in response to American questions. So, but this is my guess, my subjective assessment, because when it comes to the coherent voice of Europe, I think that this is quite a tricky exercise to exclude a number of countries, especially from Central and Eastern Europe, and it already has created unhealthy responses from these countries, and definitely plays very much in hands of Russia, who is envisioning and very much hoping for this unity within the European Union. And I think that these kind of selective invitations hasn't been very constructive diplomatic move.
Understood. As you've already noted, there are some EU countries that have already commented on precisely that. Slovenia comes to mind, for example. Now, you mentioned also the questionnaire and Europe's role in protecting European security and contributing to Ukrainian security. What would you like to see the US role as being when it comes to Ukrainian security?
Well, definitely, if you're talking about the effective deterrence, if you consider the sort of ceasefire reached and some kind of meaningful ceasefire being implemented, then, especially from Russia's side, especially knowing the bad history of all the previous ceasefires that had been reached and breached by Russia 20 times since 2014. So it's definitely an understanding that some viable security guarantees should be provided to Ukraine. And when you speak about deterrence, it's a question about capabilities of European countries to contribute to that. So definitely, when you talk to a lot of Europeans, they would mention that without American support, it's definitely a very challenging exercise. And when it comes to American support, it's mostly the issue of the support with the long-range missiles, with probably some air support. And this is something that is being considered and discussed right now, I guess, between Americans and Europeans. To my mind, as a diplomat, the very fact of this questionnaire with very precise questions to Europeans is a good sign, because it is about constructive dialogue that Americans would like to have with Europeans when it comes to real security guarantees. So right now, it's the ball is on the court of diplomats from Europe and US and Ukraine also, to discuss these technical details of viable security guarantees.
Understood. Now, talking of dialogue, US negotiators and Russian negotiators are meeting in Riyadh, and much has been said, perhaps rightly, that there isn't a seat for Ukraine at the table, and neither is there a seat for EU representatives at that table. Your comments?
I think that it is a very simplistic view of the process, because if you read extra comments made also by Russian side, for instance, they say that it's a bit premature to have this kind of wide table with all the participants, Europeans and Ukraine, unless America officially appointed a special envoy for Russia for these negotiations. So this is something that they probably might be discussing bilaterally right now. From American side, I think that it's still a testing ground, what they can do or which parameters or whatever Russians would like to have before they will be constructing the picture also from the point of Ukraine's interest, Ukraine's vision, and also European partners. As I mentioned, this questionnaire for me, it's a good sign that neither Europeans nor Ukraine are sidelined from this process. This is just the first step to find out the position of the Russian side, and probably Americans accounting for that. If this first step is made in bilateral track with Russians and Americans only, Russians might be more open and frank according to what they would like to have, and then Americans will be assessing this when more information is at table from the other participants as well.
Understood. Now, President Zelensky is on a tour of the UAE. He's going to Saudi Arabia and Turkey. What are the objectives of this trip?
I think that these countries already flagged themselves as being somehow more neutral, if I can put it this way, in compared to Europeans when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And definitely Russians might be open to get engaged in dialogue with these countries, or even to consider these locations as potential platform for next meeting, for future talks. So for Ukrainian side, definitely it is also very much important to get engaged with these actors and to deliver the messages and to deliver the view from Ukrainian point of view and assessment of the situation. So in terms of diplomacy, this is very much and very timely move that Ukrainian political leadership is currently doing. So hopefully it will be fruitful and successful.
Understood. Now, one of the things, of course, that President Zelensky said he was going to be talking to the leaders at the UAE about was a further exchange of prisoners, which would be facilitated by the UAE. What is the situation with prisoners at the moment? Can you give us an idea?
Yes and no, because it's still a very sensitive issue to comment publicly before the next step is taken. But actually, if you take the pattern, how this exchange of prisoners has been happening all these times, so Russians, they're using this as political leverage also to slow the speed or to stop even for some time, to disrupt this exchange of prisoners of war according to political rationality at a certain stage. So if we're talking about the real Russian interest to get engaged in the meaningful dialogue, they definitely need to show this with the smaller steps. And prisoners of war exchange, this is probably one of the steps that might be considered, that the Russians are acting in good political will.
Well, we shall certainly be watching carefully. Iuliia Osmolovska, thank you very much indeed for coming along and sharing your expertise with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. That's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.